And I am going to turn things over now to Noah Richler, who is an author in his own right, as you know. He joined Luminato in the spring and has spent the better part of his career working with writers and thinking about books. His work has been nominated for several of Canada's major literary awards, including the Governor-General's, and as he says, he's even won one, the BC Award for Canadian Nonfiction for his wonderful cultural portrait of Canada. This is My Country, What's Yours? Please welcome Noah Richler.
If you're wondering where the women are on stage, I'm afraid they've mostly been killed. How exciting to see so many of you out here. What was I doing writing all those dreary nonfiction books? Obviously, it should have been a thriller. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how this came about, if I may, because I think it was about 15 years ago now. I was traveling in the American South. I was doing a series on the South through its writers for the BBC at the time. And I was with my friend, the writer Mark Richard, and we were in Oxford, Mississippi, which is a great town, and which has a super bookstore. It was one of the first where you could ever have a coffee, you know, amid the stacks. And he sold a lot of books doing so, and it was Richard Horwath who owned it. And we, Mark and I wanted to go see Eudora Welty and pay tribute to her, and he helped arrange that. And so we drove down. We were just in our 30s in suits and ties and bearing a big bouquet of flowers, and we were received by her. She was about, in her late 80s at the time, and let us into the house, which was, curtains drawn, dark, beautiful. And she said, "So where are you boys from?" And we said, "Well, we came from Oxford, ma'am." And she said, "Oxford, Mrs. Well, why, they have such good murders up there." And that thought has sort of stayed with me ever since. You know, what makes a good murder, and then how much where we come from might shape that idea. And I have to give credit where it's due. When Laura Repass, who worked for the House of Anansi, told me she had, now, I'm sorry not to include you in this, Herman, who is of course Dutch, because she said she was bringing over a couple of striking Vikings, and suggested that maybe we could create a panel looking at the idea of killing as it's done in Scandinavia and so on. And we've managed to do that. So I want to thank not only the Toronto Public Library and the House of Anansi and Simon & Schuster Canada and Random House, but also Norla, which is the cultural arm of the Norwegian Embassy, and the Swedish Embassy too, for helping to make this possible. And the authors, who three of whom have come here for 2 days from a great distance, which I think is very sporting of them. Now, it's hard not to sound like that this afternoon's is a boxing match, but we have here Norway's Thomas Enger, Dan T. Sehlberg of Sweden, and Dan, I've learned, is not short for Daniel. Jakob Melander, and from outside of Scandinavia, as I am too, as most of us are, Herman Koch of the Netherlands. I'm a bit nervous because I know there are people out there who are far more knowledgeable and exacting readers of thrillers than I am. And you'll have an opportunity to pitch in and ask what you would like to know later. We're going to chat for about 40 minutes. But just by way of the briefest of introductions, Thomas Enger's had a couple of his Henning, is that how I pronounce it? Yeah. Henning? Henning series published. And Jakob Melander, The House That Jack Built, Dan T. Sehlberg, and The House That Jack Built is where a nice rich thriller with gruesome moments. Henning is a detective with a things to atone for and things to be angry about. We'll get to that. Dante Sehlberg has written something that is more of an international thriller in Mona that combines cyber terrorism and international politics and a bit of revenge. And Herman Koch is already celebrated for The Dinner, which we might describe as a psychological thriller. And in Summer House with Swimming Pool, he's continued certain ideas, not of plot, but of an attitude to the world in which his characters tend to be, at their worst, a little bit odious, I would say. So we have a pleasingly macabre bunch, and you'll get a sense of the style of their writing as we go, because they'll each read a short passage, just enough to, as I say, give you a sense of their voice, really. And then I'm hoping, well, not hoping, I'm sort of strongly suggesting that afterwards you do go up and don't hesitate. Often I go to readings and people pick up the books and flip through the pages and look at the words. I'm never quite sure what they're looking for. Sometimes treating the books as if they might be laced with AIDS or something. Terrified of the prospect of buying them. I know you're not like that. I know you understand that $20 for a book is what you spend on popcorn at the movies, and that there's much more substance here. I think what people are really scared of when they buy a book is the time they're committing to it. This is time extremely well spent. So, if I may, first of all, thanks again. Can I, you heard me tell the story of Eudora Welty there. When a writer says, oh, they have such good murders up there, what do you think, what would you have on your mind? Jakob, I'll start. What makes a good murder?
What's a good murder? Well, it can be all sorts of things.
How are we doing? I think we need to check that.
Is there a mic on it?
I'm going to pull the mic up.
Should be on here. Does that help? Should help a bit. Yeah. A good murder? Well, it can be all sorts of things.
Okay.
It's not
we're going to
better.
change the lapel.
Okay, I'll do like this, okay?
You can attach it to your nose or something.
Yeah, yes.
Dan, can I get somebody to come up and just work with us as we're chatting? Okay.
I really don't know. It has to fit the story, I think. The kind of story that you're writing. I mean, you can, of course, think out a lot of spectacular details. But if they don't fit the story and don't fit the mood and the theme of the story, the morale, if you will, it doesn't really work.
I had imagined, really, that she was also referring to real murders that she was reading about.
Ah, okay. Well, then, in that case, there are no good murders.
That's very honorable of you. Herman, perhaps I can ask you, are there deaths or murders that you've read about that have piqued your interest or prompted any storytelling in you? That might be another way to think about it.
Sorry about the
Are there murders or deaths in real life that you've read about that have prompted the stories you tell?
Well, yes, for The Dinner, it was not really a murder, but for The Dinner I used a real event that actually happened like this in Barcelona some 7 years ago, where two youngsters started molesting a homeless person in a cash machine. And they were throwing objects at her, and it ended in the end fatally. But they were apparently, by the video cameras who filmed them, the CCTV cameras, they were having a good time. So then I thought, I write about that.
So this appeals to me. Yeah, okay. Thomas, you're when you encounter, you're dealing, you're brokering in a sense in the idea of death. What are the components of a good murder for you?
The components. I'm not sure, to be honest. If I can just pick up on what Herman said, I think that all crime writers are flipping through the newspapers looking for things that can inspire us in some way. That doesn't mean that we sit like this. Ooh, this was a cool murder that we could put in our books, you know. But it has to have a certain thing to it that, you know, makes me really interested in the question why. Why did this murder take place? And you know, that's the key, I think, for all crime writers to be more sort of occupied with the reasons behind than the actual killings themselves.
That's interesting you say that, because I've always thought that novels of all kinds really begin in doubt. I once had a terrible relationship with a lawyer, and it was partly terrible because at the end of the day, she and a group of lawyers would come back and they would tell me about the various cases that had gone on with no qualms. You know, they describe, because essentially their day ended with a judge deciding that a person was guilty or not guilty, which I suppose is when the novelist's journey begins.
Yeah.
What does it mean to be guilty?
Yeah,
You know, is there, Dan, is there a question of some kind that begins your novel writing?
Absolutely, yes. I would just hang on to the first question,
Sure.
the good murder. I think one of the key things is that you really feel for the characters, that you, as a writer, manage to expose them you have to create them in flesh and blood, so the reader really feels with these persons. I think we all have seen like a film or television shows where someone is killed and you don't really care, right? But if there is a character that you are really feeling, you are inside the character when the murder happens. You can feel the anxiety, the terror, the fear, or you're inside the killer, which is maybe even more scarier, that you really feel like you are the killer and you are there in the moment when it happens. You can almost feel the rush of that. I think that as a good writer, if you could create that, that's a good murder, definitely.
Thomas, yeah.
A good friend of mine who also writes crime fiction, he once told me that he had this story about a girl that he really wanted to tell, and he is this kind of socially he is concerned about social issues, and this girl carried a story that he felt was really important to tell, and for him the best way to tell that story was to kill her.
Okay, I'm going home now.
So that the police, so that the media could really get interested in her life and why she had been killed.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
I wonder if...
He made her a favor, you could say.
Yeah.
No, I paused for a moment because we've had a series of pretty awful murders here in Moncton, and there immediately, again, is the issue of whether or not newspapers should write about such things. Of course, they write about murders in a different way than you're doing, but so that question of attention is obviously an interesting one. And each of you are trying to give attention to something, but to come back to the question that might have started Mona, which is a thriller that combines the technological and the biological world in imagining the possibility of death on a grand scale. You know, what began that journey?
It's two things, actually. I think one of them is scenery, that I've chosen to. I could have made it easy and put a story on the back streets of Stockholm. The back streets of Stockholm is actually in the story, but we're also down in France, we're in Somalia, but mainly we're down in the Israel-Palestine conflict, which I find is highly, highly interesting as a backdrop for a story. But the main driving thing with the book is that that you are actually have a computer virus that's infecting people. Nothing spreads like a computer virus, so it's a scary thought. And it actually is a true story in a way, because we had, when I was in 1995, I was working at the newspaper. We were giving a software, pretty lousy game actually. It was not fun at all. It was just a little ping pong ball going back and forth and two panels like this, black and white, really, really crappy. But the important thing was how you control the game. That was with, you put 2 bricks on the foreheads, and you could actually control it with your thought in 1995. So everybody in the newspaper wanted to try it. But then the computer driving the game was hit by a virus. And the IT manager was really angry at us that we have installed it without asking and all these things. But I was actually then joking that, okay, Mel, if it has spread to all the servers, maybe you have to check on all the people who's actually played the game, because we've been connected to the computer who's been infected by a virus. So perhaps, we're all infected. And that was the kind of basic idea for the story.
An anxiety of huge proportions. Herman, can you recognize the initial impulse, and did it take the form of question or a doubt?
Yes, in the latest book, Summer House with Swimming Pool, I actually chose a general practitioner, a doctor, who is the narrator and the protagonist of the novel. And he, you might say, if we normal people want to whack somebody off or kill somebody, we have to really think of active, what we'll do. We wait outside of his house, of his home with a car, and then with the lights off we run him over, or we buy a gun, or whatever. But a doctor, by just when his patient comes into his practice and says, I have this little lump here and it doesn't stop bleeding and it feels not right. And this doctor says, I wouldn't worry about it. You just go, you want to go on vacation for 6 weeks? Well, I take a little sample of it, and you come back in 6 weeks and you'll see it's just nothing. While he knows, looking at this with all his experience, that this man should have gone to hospital yesterday. So that was the main, the murder weapon I was thinking about. A passive, very passive murder weapon. And actually, of course, doctors in real life kill off their patients by medical errors. Sometimes, not all doctors.
So the debate that we're having in Canada and the resolution passed in Quebec about assisted suicide is basically unnecessary. Just visit.
Well, you would just get, it would get a little bit up. The death rate would get a few percent up, but nothing will change really.
All right.
But this is interesting, because the key thing for me when I start to write a story is the question, what if? What if something completely different than, like like your character, this doctor who by doing nothing actually kills someone. What if what if there actually are people like that? What if?
And beginning, just the discovery of a death, a reason for these seemingly gentle people in front of you to read on and offer them something to capture the attention and drive the plot forward is immensely important. I wonder if you might read the opening few pages of Burned? Yeah.
Actually, Pierce. Yes, I'm going to do the prologue from my second novel, which is called Pierce. The first one is called Burned. Okay. Jokke's Harley Davidson is already there. Tore Pulin parks his motorbike and removes his crash helmet. The gravel crunches when his feet touch the ground. The windows in the old factory stare blindly out into the darkness. The silence is dense and eerie. Pulley hangs his helmet on the handlebars and walks across to the door. The hinges groan when he pushes it open. He enters warily. Jokke? His voice bounces off the walls. His boots slam against the concrete floor. Little by little, his eyes acclimatize to the darkness, but all he can see is the naked floor and walls, beams and pillars wreathed in cobwebs. The October winds howls through the panes of broken glass. White clouds of frozen breath pour from his mouth. It's almost like the old days, Pulley thinks, as he moves forward, the build-up to the confrontation. He can feel the adrenaline pumping, and he likes it. His eyes are drawn to something lying on the floor, deeper into the shadows. He approaches with caution, and is met by a pungent smell of urine and metal. He steps in something slippery and has to take a step to the side to avoid falling over. He pulls out his mobile and uses it to light up the floor. Then he sees what he trod in. A body lies in front of him. The back of the blood-stained leather jacket has been slashed repeatedly. Above the collar, the skull shines brightly through the shaven and tattooed scalp. He recognizes the tattoo immediately. Only Jocke Brolenius has "Go to Hell" tattooed on the back of his neck. His mobile goes dark. His eyes dart around and it pricks up his ears, but he hears nothing in the profound silence. The room appears to be empty, apart from Jocke, a man Pulley loathed with a passion, but didn't want dead for anything in the world, or at least not now. He bends down, grabs hold of the leather jacket, and turns over the heavy body. The face is contorted and bloody. The mouth is open. Pulley presses 2 fingers against the artery on Jocke's neck, but withdraws his hand at once. Jocke's throat is still warm, soft and loose, like a moist, mangled sponge. Then he sees it on the floor, the knuckle duster. His knuckle duster. How the hell did it end up here? He is overcome by a horrible realization. A lot of people knew about this meeting, and even more saw him set out for it. Far too many knew that his knuckle duster hung on the wall in his study. And now he has Jocke's blood on his hands, his clothes, and his boots. Someone has set him up. Some bastard has set him up. Pulley is about to pick up the knuckle duster and flee the scene, but he stops himself. You touched the body, he thinks. Your fingerprints are on Jocke's leather jacket. Don't make things worse for yourself. It's bad enough as it is. He takes out his mobile again. With blood-stained fingers, he enters the number of the emergency services to call the police. You know what really happened, he says to himself. Tell them the truth, and you'll be all right. You've got nothing to be scared of.
Do any of you ever worry about the stories you write becoming true? I mean, Dan, obviously, that's a concern with you. But even more so, whether the act of writing it is sort of pushing us a little bit more in that direction. And whether...
I can just,
Sure.
if I can just start. Actually, I have worried about that. Not that the computer virus will go, make the bio jump. But actually, the driving thing in my book is that they create a very powerful computer virus to hit the Israeli banking system. And so when I started to write the book for 4 years ago, I felt that was kind of a new idea. But then it started to happen kind of that same thing in the South Korean War and in other different conflicts. They use computer viruses. And I actually thought about what if, exactly this thing that I'm writing about would actually happen.
What if?
What if?
Yeah, that was,
And there's also a murder in the beginning of the book in Dubai, the Mossad murder. And what I have written that kind of sequence, and just 3 months later it was all over the news with a Mossad murder in Dubai. So either I take it away because everyone thinks, he doesn't have any fantasy, or it's actually, what I'm writing about is actually happening. That's it.
so you should be
Yeah.
very, very careful.
Very careful.
And I suppose, Herman, you might feel safe from this idea because, at least with the dinner, and I'm not sure to what extent with Summer House with swimming pool, you're writing something that to an extent may or has happened in the dinner. I'm not sure if it did with the summer house with swimming pool. But do you ever worry that writing too well might be suggestive?
Sorry, the last
Do you ever worry that writing too well might be suggestive, that there are a bunch of doctors out there who think, this could...
Well, actually, with summer house with swimming pool, I was at one point I was with my own general practitioner. Luckily, touch wood, I'm not going too often. I'm not visiting him too often. And I told him what I was writing about. He asks me sometimes he asks me, and your new novel? And I said, well, actually, I'm going to write about a doctor. And he was going like, what? Sorry? And I said, no, it's not, don't worry. It's not about you. Always,
Yet.
as a writer, you always have to tell lies. When your wife reads about a very strong woman character in your novel, you say, no, it's not you. You have to tell her. So that was my point. But there's, of course, many people here that the book just came out, but the reactions in other countries, and especially in the Netherlands, were after reading this, that apart from that, many people are giving it as a present to their doctor. Sorry. Many people don't trust their doctors anymore after reading it. So I wouldn't recommend it to people with bad health.
Now,
because it might get worse.
I was interested, we had a conversation which some of you have may read, or I prompted each of our generous four to talk a bit about their weapons of choice, and you actually referred to a Roald Dahl story, because I've always felt there's a touch of the Roald Dahl about you. I don't remember the name of the story in which, if I have it right, the man is an adulterer, murders his wife, and then I think his mistress has an accident and stares back at him in their next bout of lovemaking with the eyes of the killed wife. Do you remember that story?
No.
Yeah. It's already been written. It's good. Yeah. But Jakob, you have a thing about doctors in a somewhat more elaborate mode. I don't know how much to give away, but in the house that Jack built, there is a surgeon at the core of it, and certain chilling practices. Do you worry about the suggestion, or are you ever uncomfortable with the gruesomeness of what you write?
No, I don't think I am. I know I'm not. First of all, this doctor that is really, he is not very nice. I've put him back in time, back in the World War II days, in 1944 in Denmark. So he's safely stowed away in the past. I don't have to be afraid of him.
And you don't have readers writing in for tips or anything? Or?
Once again, please?
I said you don't have readers writing in for tips.
No, I don't. So I'm not really worried about that, or not either about things happening. But what we can hear from what we're discussing here, maybe we should only write about murders that have already happened, because then it won't be dangerous.
Well, there are plenty, aren't there? Thomas, you wanted to...
Yeah, I was just going to say that I'm really terrified of what I'm writing. And the main reason for that is that my main character, he is a journalist like I've been for many years. And he has lost his son in a domestic fire. And I have, kids of my own, and I would really, really, hate, that's a soft word for it. I mean, I would, be dead myself if that happened to me. So I'm kind of writing about my own worst fear in a way, and I would, and I've been kind of asking myself if are you doing this just to torment yourself, but it is a horrible thing to write about in many ways, because you have to picture yourself being in that situation. And when I have my children running around my feet every day, that I have to imagine them being dead. So.
Well, apparently, if Jakob is believed, history will offer you some insulation from this. Jakob, maybe you'd like to read the from the house that Jack built.
Yes.
This is, there are scenes in the past, there are scenes in the present. This is one from the past. You'll set it up.
Yes, this is a scene from August 1944. The kitchen window is open. The checkered curtains hang motionless on the warm summer evening. Twilight is descending, but a faint afterglow still clings to the sky. She's sitting on the stool in the corner by the stove, her heart fluttering in her chest. He's making the crossing tonight. Father has arranged for a boat to Sweden, agreed to the time and place with one of the local fishermen. Jack will send word when she can join him. Her head is light, she has a strange feeling in her stomach, as though something inside her is going to break. She gets up, runs a finger along the brass pipe that circles the black cast iron stove. She starts at a sudden vision of a deathly pale face, with blood running down the cheeks, appearing in the dim light in the corner behind the stove. "Jack," she whispers. Then she clenches her teeth. Jack is hiding in the bottom of a fishing jolly in Öresund. In an hour, he'll be safely in Sweden, and in a month or two, she'll be in his arms again, en route to Stockholm or London. She'll be listening to the silly odes he sings to her eyes. She shakes her head. No one can find rhymes for grey, blue, and green like Jack. He's the first person who has been able to name her imperfections without her getting upset. She laughs to herself, a young girl's fantasy, dreamy as the last embers of the purple light that is fading in the evening sky. She gets up, dances, hums. The curtain, the dish towel, the entire kitchen still smells of the basket of Danish meatballs she made for Father and Jack to take with them. From the living room, she hears the soothing clicks of Mother's knitting needle as they knock together with soporific regularity. Everything is calm. No evil can reach them. What does it matter that nations are crumbling all around them? As long as they have love, everything else is so profoundly trivial. Outside, the garden gate opens and shuts. Could Father be returning already? The steps on the garden path are firm like Father's, but more supple, rapid. A young man? Her heart leaps inside of her. No, it can't be him. He would only come back if something went wrong, and not in full view of the entire neighborhood. Her proud Jack would come crawling through the bushes at the back of the garden, in from the swamp where no one could see him. At the front door, the knocker strikes the brass fitting. In the living room, Mother gets up with some difficulty, puts down her knitting. Laura is on the kitchen floor, quiet as a mouse, wishing time would stand still. Mother's voice whispers through the house. It's for her, Arno. Can she go out to the garden? Like a sleepwalker, she leaves the kitchen, dragging her feet in her worn clogs. Her gaze is lowered, her blood filled with ice. She doesn't want to, and yet she must. She cannot, but she has to. Her mother has returned to her knitting and the shove chair in the corner. He stands under the old copper beech, the one that is practically strangled by the climbing hydrangea. He calls her, standing there in his uniform with his hands folded in front of him, in his shiny boots, riding pants and cap. Why is he here tonight? She doesn't want to be seen with a member of the Hippo Corps, not even if he's an old classmate. He starts talking before she's even reached him. His voice is thick, his cheeks flushed. He talks about the two of them, about the future, about happiness and marriage, children. But she cannot, she will not listen. Arno is pleading. He's down on his knees, but she doesn't notice Arno, and she knows he can sense it, that she's somewhere else. And then, as he gets up, his eyes harden. The tears have left dark lines on his cheeks. The vision returns, the one she had inside the kitchen. Arno's face is ashen, the pale face of a corpse in the white night. And she does not want to, but she must look all the same. Arno's hands open to expose the horrible secret they hold. Two eyes with secret pupils. Two eyes that, clear and alive and full of expectation and love, got drunk on the side of her only a few hours earlier. She can still see herself as Jack saw her, reflected in the dead iris and all the white that is now caked in blood, with the severed nerve endings resting in Arno's trembling fingers. Then the garden gate squeaks behind Arno, its father returning. He nods briefly at Arno, avoids her gaze. He walks up the garden path and disappears into the house. And then she knows. The scream comes from deep down inside, rises from her bosom. It sears upwards through flesh, sinew, and bones, passes the tiny life that grows beneath her navel. But when the blood wind reaches the oral cavity, it has lost all strength. Only a faint whimper passes her lips, the sound that comes from the mice in Father's trap behind the kitchen cupboard in the morning.
Now, you have about 350 experts in murder out there. Is there ever pressure upon yourselves to imagine something, how to achieve, well, how to win or keep people's attention? I think of thriller writing in particular almost like a stage play, in that you have it. People have a certain expectation of the form, and it's yours until you lose it. But there's also must be a big job in presenting something new. You know, that's what is in at least the English word novel. You know, the new. Are you conscious of that as you write?
I think that I am at least conscious that this has to flow. I'm a former musician. I played guitar, and the feeling of music, of the language as music, is very important to me. The flow of it, rhythm, timbre. So that's one part of one thing you can do to keep the attention. But of course also in the plot and how the story moves on along. I use the dramaturgy of film to construct my stories, and it has worked pretty fine for me.
And you know, Herman, we spoke briefly of Michel Houellebecq, who the two of you derive a kind of relish from the unsavory characters. Is that an enjoyment? Does that offer you the opportunity to be, as I say, to be new or to tread ground? Is that even a concern for you?
I always find what you call unsavory characters, they're almost always more interesting. And it can be that a person who might seem evil when he tells you the story, you might at sometimes have to ask yourself when you're reading about what this evil acts that this person is doing or only thinking, you can think, well, there he has a point. This person might have a point at some time. He might be right. And it's a lot less boring than a very good and gentle person who's sometimes wrong.
And Dan, I get the impression that you're almost impatient with form a little bit. I mean, you are dealing with a novel that crosses frontiers. I'm always interested in thriller writing in particular because it offers the forensics of place, that along the journey, along trying to unravel fascinating plots, there's a way in which the nature of the investigation means that we learn very specifically about a place. Mona is international in its scope. Was that very important to you from the beginning?
I think that you have like a couple of different important parts for a good book or a good thriller. That you have to have a strong narrative, you have to have very good characters, but also if you could, spice that up with interesting places, sceneries, then you have a good dish. And the thriller concept is offering this in an interesting way. And I think that the places themselves brings a lot of impact to the story. By choosing them, that you have the dynamics of a place that's really forcing the whole narrative, as do good characters. So you shouldn't have either of these three, you should try to have them all.
But you can give us an example of that international reach with your opening pages, I think. Should you do that now?
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, we should have remembered that our striking Vikings would be taller than me. Okay.
I asked if I could read in Swedish, so I will. Thank you very much. Actually, one thing before I start, to go back to what we said earlier here, I have a daughter myself, and I can absolutely feel what Thomas was saying here, because I also I think all parents, the biggest fear you have is to lose your child. Of course, there's nothing that can compare to that, and I'm actually exploring the same thing in this book, Mona. Mona is the name of a little 8-year-old girl, and that's kind of what happens to her is the driving force of the whole novel. So I will start with a prologue that starts up in Qana. It's the south parts of Lebanon. The little girl in the beautiful dress was taking a big risk. It had rained, and the field behind Grandma's house was muddy and slippery. Her ponytail had slipped and released her dark curls. She was sneaking up on a cat, trying not to scare it, stepping in the brown mud with her white canvas shoes. The cat was snoozing at a car tire that was half buried next to the rusty soccer goal. It was a thin cat with pretty stripes, like a tiger. Maybe it was a tiger, and maybe she was a magic princess who could speak with tigers. Then something scared the cat and it ran off toward the stone bridge and the roaring brown river. The princess found an old can instead. No, of course it wasn't the can. It was the tiger's little cub, abandoned in the mud. She carefully dried it off with her dress. Her mother often and accurately called her the chameleon. Giving a little time, her clothes would look exactly like the ground where she played. On this particular day, her mother and grandmother had been too busy in the kitchen to notice her running out in the fields in a new turquoise dress. Unlike the dress, the can tiger was now nice and clean, but hungry. Tigers are always hungry. She pressed the can to her chest, slipping and sliding off across the field. The two women looked in horror at the muddy little girl as she came into the kitchen, out of breath. "Grandma, I need a bowl of water right away." Elif set down a steaming pan of Sambosek pastries that was just out of the oven. "You don't need a bowl, you need a whole bathtub." She looked and laughed at Nadim, anticipating an outburst from her daughter. Mona did the same, suddenly conscious of her muddy condition. "Mama, don't be mad. I found a tiger cub and it's hungry." Mona held one hand inside her dress and urgently stretched the other towards Elif, who gave her a Sambosek. As the girl fed her charge, her dress slid up, and Nadim caught a glimpse of the tiger. The room swayed suddenly. She had to grab the counter to avoid losing her balance. "My darling, the tiger is very dangerous. It could bite you. Stand perfectly still." Mona smiled happily, glad her mother was playing along. Nadim instinctively pushed her mother aside. She, too, had seen what Mona was cradling in her arms, and she started to pray. Nadim slowly moved closer to her daughter. "May I have the tiger?" Mona shook her head. "She's only calm when I hold her. She gets scared really easy. Her mother abandoned her." Nadim couldn't hold back her tears. Mona was the most beautiful thing in existence. Her beloved daughter, the miracle of Kwana. In a shaky voice, she repeated, "Give Mama the tiger. Otherwise, Mama will be angry, super angry." Mona saw her mother's tears. She looked nervously at her grandmother and heard her prayers. Then she extended the hand with the tiger cub. That wasn't a tiger cub. That was a can. That wasn't a can. That was a grenade from an Israeli cluster bomb. Nadim held her gaze steady on her daughter's face. Their hands met. It was as though the nerves in her hand, the small, tiny hands on her skin, was reaching for her daughter with a pulsating intensity. She held her breath and placed her hand around the cool grenade. Thank you.
So Herman, when I was a young man, I was in Amsterdam, and I've been drinking and smoking and visiting the various bars and enjoying myself. And I felt courageous, and I said to the bartender, "Een bier," meaning one beer, I thought, in Dutch. And he started swearing at me. And I said, "Oh, geez, what was that? Sorry about that." He said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were an Englishman pretending to be German speaking Dutch." Which is a way of suggesting that, history has a certain shadow in European states, possibly more so than here. I don't want to have drawn these people here on false pretenses. I wonder if, in a Rorschach way, don't think on it too long, each one of you might suggest what in your national psyche might have affected your work. I would encourage you to see other Luminato events. I went to see Cineastas, it was wonderful. And there was a tremendous sense of missing parents in this stage play, of people searching for roots, the roots having been, I suppose, damaged, if not wiped out in previous years of dictatorship. Is there some way in which, where you're from, you realize affects your work. Thomas?
I think that where you're from and who you are, all the things you have experienced up to the point where you actually sit down and write. I think all that everything kind of affects the way you write, the choices you make. For me, I think that I don't think that I'm particularly Norwegian when I'm writing. My feel for it is that I'm trying to write something that I would like to read myself. I don't think that my characters are particularly Norwegian either. I don't know if that answered your question or not. But
No, you have. It's interesting. I mean, place may not be a discussion in Norway as it is in Norway, the new Canada, I would say, as it is here. But I'm thinking of Henning. I'm thinking of his terribly injured aspect, both physically and in the loss of his son. But if you tell me there's nothing Norwegian in that, I'll accept that. And that's fine, Yeah. I'm happy. Jakob, the shadow of history plays its part in the house that Jack built, in the scene from 44 or 45 that you read, in the hiding of an injured British pilot in the cellar of this house. Are you ever aware of something that is intrinsically Danish in what you do?
In Denmark in the 50s, we had a poster that should attract tourists to Denmark. And it was about, on the poster, it was a drawing, there was a policeman stopping the traffic because a duck with all the ducklings were passing the street. And that was an image of Denmark, and I think that goes for all the Scandinavian countries, that we wanted to project to the world. Of course, that's not the whole truth. So whenever I see such an image, I always think, what's underneath? And that was what I wanted to explore here. Without revealing too much, the doctor we spoke about before in my story is from the resistance movement. That's why he hides this British pilot, bomber pilot, on his way back from bombing Berlin and Hamburg. And they've always been presented as heroes in Denmark. And I thought, what if this guy was a hero, but also was an evil man? That would be interesting. So have that duality on those both sides is interesting.
And Herman, are you self-consciously rejecting the niceness that we've always assumed of Dutch people? Herman, I was saying, yeah.
What of the Dutch people, sorry?
The niceness of Dutch. We think of.
I don't know. What I use in my novels is the Dutch were always known and famous for being so tolerant, And I think this idea has come a bit to an end now. We also have a big right-wing party now. And I think this feeling of tolerance might have come from a feeling actually of superiority. There are a lot of Dutch people who think, we're a small country, but we know how you have to do things. And so I use this in my novel, attacking sometimes a bit of this mentality of over-political correctness that we had for many years in Holland, and it's now a bit coming to an end. I think the Dutch are showing their face now a little bit more like they really are.
So do you have perhaps a passage in which, I'm not saying it's representative of the Dutch in the entirety, but in which you can show someone as he really is? Perhaps your doctor. Do you have a passage from Summer House with Swimming Pool that you might share with us?
Sure. I will just start at the beginning, the first few pages of the first chapter of the book. I am a doctor. My office hours are from 8:30 in the morning to 1 in the afternoon. I take my time, 20 minutes for each patient. Those 20 minutes are my unique selling point. Where else these days people say, can you find a family doctor who gives you 20 minutes? And they pass it along. He doesn't take on too many patients, they say. He makes time for each individual case. I have a waiting list. When a patient dies or moves away, all I have to do is pick up the phone and I have 5 new ones to take their place. Patients can't tell the difference between time and attention. They think I give them more attention than other doctors, but all I give them is more time. By the end of the first 60 seconds, I've seen all I need to know. The remaining 19 minutes I fill with attention, or I should say with the illusion of attention. I ask all the usual questions. How is your son, daughter getting along? Are you sleeping better these days? Are you sure you're not getting too much, too little to eat? I hold the stethoscope to their chests, then to their backs. Take a deep breath, I say. Now breathe out nice and slow. I don't really listen. Or at least I try not to. On the inside, all human bodies sound the same. First of all, of course, there's the heartbeat. The heart is blind, the heart pumps, the heart is the engine room. The engine room only keeps the ship going, it doesn't keep it on course. And then there are the sounds of the intestines, of the vital organs. An overburdened liver sounds different from a healthy one. An overburdened liver groans. It groans and begs. It begs for a day off, a day to deal with the worst of the garbage. The way things are now, it's always in a hurry, trying to catch up with itself. The overburdened liver is like the kitchen in a restaurant that's open round the clock. The dishes pile up. The dishwashers are working full tilt, but the dirty dishes and caked-on pans only pile up higher and higher. The overburdened liver hopes for that one day off that never comes. Every afternoon at 4:30, 5 o'clock, sometimes earlier, the hope of that one day off is dashed again. If the liver's lucky, at first it's only beer. Beer passes most of the work along to the kidneys, but you always have those for whom beer alone isn't enough. They order something on the side, a shot of gin, vodka or whiskey, something they can knock back. The overburdened liver braces itself, then finally ruptures. First, it grows rigid, like an overinflated tire. All it takes then is one little bump in the road for it to blow wide open. I listen with my stethoscope. I press against the hard spot, just beneath the skin. Does this hurt? If I press any harder, it will burst open right there in my office. Can't have that. It makes an incredible mess. Blood gushes out in a huge wave. No general practitioner is keen to have someone die in his office. At home, that's a different story. In the privacy of their own homes, in the middle of the night, in their own beds, with a ruptured liver, they usually don't even make it to the phone. The ambulance would get there too late anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, Herman. I'm aware that I offered you a moment for questions. That's coming up right now. I just wanted to ask, first of all, and I suppose, well, this applies more to Dan and Thomas and Jakob, but are you ever impatient with the impulse or almost the requirement that a mystery be solved? I mean, I suppose in the case of ongoing protagonists, like Henning or like Lars Winkler, their trauma is not solved. But do you ever feel that it would actually be more true not to solve your murder?
I can do first. I have a main character who I'm going to write 5 novels about him, and the 5 novels can all be read by themselves. There is a mystery in each of the five novels, but there is this one story that goes through the whole series, and that is what like I said before, my main character, he has lost his son in a domestic fire, and because he used to be a really good crime reporter, he has this feeling, this burning notion in his mind that someone actually set fire to his apartment. So that is the question that motivates him. That is what gets him up in the day. But he doesn't find the answer to that question in the first book. He doesn't find the answer to that question in the second book either. But there are of course different stories in each book that are all combined together in a way. So.
And Dan, is there something that remains unresolved in Mona that might, even for you as a writer, just push you on to the next book?
Yes, it is. I mean, there's a sequel to Mona. It's 2 book stories, actually. You could say that the main story is in a way tied up in Mona, but there's a lot of things still unresolved going on to the sequel that's called Xenon, which is important to get, I mean, the full picture. And on that question, I mean, if it would have been, I think it's very important that it's believable. I think that if you have a story, it needs to be believable that they don't realize, you know, the clues or whatever. It's once again, it's all about being a good storyteller to plot the things in a believable way. As soon as you get, I think when I read, as soon as you get aware that you are reading, it's something wrong. I mean, you should be really swiped away and you should just go along with it. And as soon as you are aware that someone is telling a story, something in the rhythm, I'm a musician myself, so I totally agree on the rhythm, and something has kind of infected the rhythm in the wrong way. So I think that's a very, very important part.
Thomas, yeah. Is there something false, though, about the novel, in that it offers an ending, you know, in a way? Jakob?
Literary fiction has been without an ending, because it should mime modern day life, which is without sense, without meaning. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. But crime fiction, actually, at least Scandinavian and European crime fiction, Danish police has a solving rate of about 97-98% of murders. So this is actually rather true to real life, what happens in crime fiction here.
Just one thing that I've been talking to a friend of mine who's actually a police officer, that is, he noticed, and I totally agree, that if you look at crime fiction overall, there's the most common thing in them is a serial killer. And because it's the perfect thing for a writer, that you have a serial killer and they are plotting different kinds of and in each new novel you come up with something new. They're building this snowman outside every killing, or they're doing something, or they're leaving chess bricks or whatever. And this is not in real life. Serial killers are so unlike to even exist. If we go through history, there's so few serial killers. When you look at it, there are a few, but it's so few. And those who have been serial killers hasn't been plotting very intellectual, advanced. So that whole thing, you have to have an acceptance between the writer and the reader that, you know, serial killers exist and they are very intelligent and they plot different weird things for each killing. That's kind of, you have to settle that from the day one. And if you have that contract, it will work.
I sense the pre-World Cup Swedish-Danish fisticuffs are about to begin. You have a different point of view.
I read a book by a Danish police officer who was head of the FBI, and of course in the FBI in Virginia. And FBI says that at all times in the US, per 6 million people, there are one active serial killer. And he said we have them in Scandinavia as well. I agree totally that all that with plotting and strange things, that's just a good story, and it is a good story. But they are there and they are active and alive. But Scandinavian countries and Holland as well are so very, very well organized. We know where everybody are at all times. So the police will catch them before they...
A lot of ducks crossing the street.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
Well, I understand that Herman's next novel is about a serial killer who thinks he's being written about and is pissed off that he isn't, and so commits the murders in order to appear like the guy in the novel. Is that? No? Okay. I want to say thank you to you all. Thank you to Herman, to Jakob, Dan, and Thomas, and then offer up an opportunity to the audience to speak. There's one fixed microphone and another wandering about. Yep.
Thank you, gentlemen. I was interested, and my question is around the quote, lost in translation. Since you all write in your native languages, how do you control the translation to other languages? in the case of 25 different languages, or however many? How do you control that?
We don't. I can speak, English. I can read some German. I can even speak some German when I'm drunk enough. And I can read Danish and Swedish, but I can't read Finnish, and I can't read Japanese or Korean. So I just kind of have to trust my publishers. And of course, sometimes my novels are translated into a different language based on the English version, which can be a scary thing, because but I have monitored the translations quite closely when it comes to the English versions, and I've discovered that my translator is just phenomenal. She's Danish, by the way. Yeah, of course. So I trust her completely, and I'm so grateful that she's my translator.
Thank you. There's the lady behind you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you all for bringing this gloomy weather. I'm sure it's just for that occasion. And just as an aside about worrying about kids, actually, one line in Noah's Dad, one of the novels of Noah's Dads, is a running thing between my husband and I. When everything is calm, we look at each other and say gas leak and worry about home. But my question is addressing Herman, and it was a bit talked about in the question that Noah asked you. But what surprised me is that everything would have been fine and dandy unless the adopted, different other was the one who threatened to bring it all to the public. So, because you said we all have this idea, or used to have this idea of not only political correctness, but kindness and acceptance of the Dutch. Do you, I understand from your first answer that things are changing, and it's, we all know about the right-wing parties, but is it a relief, or is this how you viewed that character, the character of the adopted child, or is it a threat, or what's exactly that's happening? What does this very small playing part character that turns the whole thing around, what does it mirror in society?
So you mean the relationship between the adopted child in the novel and the actual Dutch tolerance or political correctness?
Yeah, because he's the
So if I may, because I want to give everybody a chance to answer the question. As I understand it, it's that's the catalyst for the revelation about the killing is the adopted child, who is other in not of the family, not of their ethnicity. What does that reflect in Dutch society or you?
Well, first of all, I thought of the idea that the character in the novel who adopts the child is like a left-wing liberal politician. And the child is adopted from an African country. And the whole idea, and this might also not only reflect the Dutch society, is that actually when you adopt a child from Africa or from South America or whatever, you're giving this child a better life or more opportunities. And then sometimes I have to think of all the children that Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt have adopted. And I'm sometimes fantasizing about what would happen to all these kids when they get divorced or they really get into serious trouble. There's something about this that I think you should think twice before you actually can affirm that you're offering a better life. So that's, and then in my novel, this adopted child is one of the evil persons even. It turns out to be one of the evil persons. That is to say, it's actually very anti-racist to have an African black person being a criminal. Think about it.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Yes?
much.
All right.
I don't mind you expanding it to other male writers, but I'm going to pay more attention to the female. I'm curious to know within your own countries in Scandinavia, what influence are there female writers in your respective genre that you respect, that have influenced you within your own countries and also outside? Now, you can also address the influence of male writers in your respective genre. Those that, you know, were highly pivotal in maybe directing you to writing in this area or influenced your particular individual books. Am I clear on my question?
If
Okay,
you'd
thank
each pick maybe one influence.
Actually, I've thought a little bit about this. I won't say that I'm really inspired by female writers, but I think there's people normally say that Scandinavian crime writers write about social issues. They're very concerned about society and how society works and the quirks and misfittings in society. And that's right. But I think there's also another side, which is very Scandinavian. That's the gloominess, melancholia, which comes from the lack of light and maybe a gloomy mind. For the male writers, I think there's also a different issue, which is not, I think maybe it's a bit overlooked, at least in political crime stories, police crime stories, that they are often men who, after the women's liberation, and I want to be clear here, I think that's necessary and it's a fine thing that has been happening, but it leaves a lot of men questioning how are our roles in society now? Women can almost do everything. So many of them are standing outside, looking in, and can't really find a way to get into this life that they can see is folding out before their eyes, but they can't really take part in it. Martin Beck is divorced, the one from Sugar and Valley, those who started everything. That is, almost has a depression. Female writers are different, and they have a different issues to write about. I don't know if that was an answer to your question.
Dan?
I mean, I'm reading. I'm really a books person, so I'm reading, very high pace, a lot of books all the time. And I just finished Donna Tartt's latest novel. Yeah, Goldfinch, which I thought was fantastic, as her other novels. And it's interesting when she goes into the mind of a boy, even though she is a female writer, and she does it very, very well, I would say. And I think this is very interesting, just to when a writer is actually writing about the other sex. I think that is a very interesting thing. And I have some very strong female characters in my own book, which was very interesting for me to try to get into the mind of that. And obviously, a lot of talk with my wife about that. But yeah.
We'll take these two more and then.
Okay, maybe two questions in one. How much work do I guess each of you, or could be anyone, invest in dialogue in your writing? And a similar question, how much into research? On the question of dialogue, in crime writing, is it more like you're displaying what a neurosis might be compared to what a schizophrenic character might portray, in terms of writing dialogue?
If I can start?
Sure.
I will answer the two questions. First of all, we just say research. It took me 4 years to write Mona. And I will say that 1.5 years was writing and the other was research. So I think that's very important. If you put your hand in the jar, you should really know what you're talking about. The other question, I think it's very positive that you bring it up, because when I read a book, I think dialogue is probably the place where you kind of where you show yourself as a writer. I would say it's very hard to get a good dialogue. And if you look at the masters of writing, they are very very naked in their dialogue. It's very simple, but still very clever. I think when and a writer comes in that is not so maybe strong in his writing, they tend to use bridges and all kinds of wording around, whilst the really good writers leave it naked, the dialogue. And the dialogue is a very important part of the book, I think, the most important part of all.
So unless there's a big disagreement, I'll move to the last question behind this gentleman. Yeah.
Or the other one, about the research.
Would you like?
I would like that.
Yeah. Okay, Herman. Research.
I would like to, because I was thinking when you were answering, I was kind of a different kind of book, but with my doctor, I decided not to do any research, but only use my own experiences I had with doctors and all the anecdotes I've heard in all my life of my family members, of friends who were telling me about medical errors and nightmares in hospitals. Only remembering of the last 40 years, everything I had heard. So I said I won't do any research. To answer the other question about the dialogue, I always think when I write dialogue, apart from the normal paragraphs or other sentences, I try to do it very fast to catch a sort of certain natural tone. And I think in dialogue you don't have to be afraid to say, have a character say, "Excuse me, I didn't hear the last question." Sorry, or what, or whatever. You have to go on and be in it. I think this is natural.
Right. Well, I'm relieved to know you're writing out of people's experiences and not your fantasies. Sir?
Just like them to comment on mass media reports on killers, and specifically I was listening to CBC the other day where a group was suggesting that any mass killing, the killer's name should not be mentioned in any of the media reports, and that they're simply suggesting that they're attention givers and they give rise to copycat. I'd like to simply have the authors comment on their influence by how they are influenced by mass media in their writing.
Okay, so I think the question was fairly clear. What you feel, are there any anxieties about the reporting? In fact, the woman who made this comment, Elizabeth Renzetti, will be speaking here on Wednesday. Thomas, you did answer that to a degree, but would you like?
Yeah, I've been a journalist for many years, and we often had discussions about whether we should name people when they've done something wrong. And I don't know if I have the right or the wrong answer to that, but a few years ago we had this terrible mass killing in Oslo, where 77 people were murdered. It was really, really horrible. And of course, the newspapers quickly learned the name of the man who had done it. And of course, in any news story later on, his name was always in there. And a lot of people thought that maybe he did what he did, just to get famous. And of course, like you said, sir, there is a certain anxiety that someone might want to try to do the same thing because they know that they will become famous. And so I don't know if we should avoid that. I'm not sure if that's even possible to just not have the perpetrators' names in the news stories. I don't see a way around that.
Just a quick one.
Sure.
On the other kind of part of that question is that if we get inspiration from reading, I think that reading the daily newspapers is a fantastic place for inspiration for a writer. And it's every time I open the daily and I go through it, I actually kind of have an idea for a novel, I think, every day. On the plane over today, I was writing, and there was a fantastic little thing in the shouldn't tell it when all this writing. No, it was nothing. It was not. No, forget about it. No.
Well,
No, it was actually about an old door. They were doing a renovation of an apartment. Just this massive building with 500 apartments. They were taking out the doors, fixing something, and in the kind of mailbox there was a little glitch. So if you put a mail in, if you come in the wrong way, it will lead in the middle of the door. And they found this, and they opened the door, and they found 80-year-old mails, that had been sent 80 years ago. And never got there. It's a fantastic story, right?
Well, I'm going to end with a comment that Don DeLillo made in conversation with me once, and I've never understood it. He said, all plots end in death. I'm not sure quite what he meant by that, but we'll take it there. I want to say thank you again to Herman Koch, to Jakob Melander, Dante Sehlberg, and Thomas Enger.